This week, the agenda explored the cosmos and the self, heard from a former prime minister on the First Nations Education Act, and evaluated what Iraq's collapse would mean to the region and the world. The agenda's Week in Review begins with the best medicine. Why do we need to take humor seriously?
Well, I think the most important reason is that it's just so important to us. People spend a good deal of their time pursuing it on a Friday night at a comedy club, watching a sitcom. They pursue it in their relationships, their friends, their coworkers, and then obviously it's an ideal characteristic in a life partner.
If you go back into history, do you have any theories as to how even the concept of humor began?
Well, yeah. So if you think about this really important process from an evolutionary standpoint, it should occur in animals. It should occur in our predecessors, and that seems to be the case. That the roots of humor are actually in physical threats and things like rough and tumble play fighting, and so on. You can see laughter, humorous reactions, not only in like infants and adults, but also in apes, bonobos, chimps, and there's even some evidence that that rats laugh.
There is evidence that rats laugh?
There's some evidence, yeah, indeed.
Okay.
So if you take, these scientists, Joel and I visited one in Chicago. You take these scientists and they have their rats. They put their hand into the cage and kind of tickle and play with the rats. They emit these ultrasonic chirps that are akin to human laughter.
Do you have any problems with some of these historical theories about how humor got started?
No, I think it actually gels with the work that we've been doing in the Humor Research Lab. The theories sort of recognize that there's this kind of potentially negative underbelly, no pun intended, to comedy. The fact is that we tend to laugh at, that we tend to be humored by things that are wrong but okay. That's what happens with play fighting, with tickling, at least the good kind.
Now, Peter, everybody always says no pun intended, but we're having a discussion about humor here, so fess up. You meant to intend a pun there. Come on.
I did.
Okay,
yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad we've got that out of the way. Tell me this. So much of life can be demonstrated by using Venn diagrams, and I gather you've come up with the idea of using Venn diagrams to reflect something about humor as well. Explain that, if you would.
Yeah, so the idea that we use in the Humor Research Lab and that Joel and I explored along our travels for the Humor Code is this notion that the humor arises from benign violations, from things that are wrong yet okay. And my collaborator on the benign violation theory, Caleb Warren, and I decided to illustrate this visually with this Venn diagram, this idea that you have this benign appraisal and then this violation appraisal, and then that overlap there, when you can have both of those occurring at the same time, you get a humorous response. People feel amused, they say, hey, that's funny, and they laugh to tell others that situation is a benign violation.
We know that some of the most beloved, let's take your country, presidents of the United States, were men who had a great sense of humor. And you can think about Ronald Reagan, you can think about John F. Kennedy. Do you think politicians would do or could do their jobs better if they took lessons in being funny?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think that one of the things that we keep finding during the Humor Code project was the challenges of trying to be funny. And the idea is that when you try to be funny, you can fail in one of two ways. You can bore people, you can create this benign situation, or you can offend people. You create this situation that's just a violation. And given a 24-hour news cycle and the Twitterverse and social media running amok, one slip of the tongue by a presidential candidate, a senator, a governor, a mayor can reach, both sides of the country within moments. And in that way, it ends up being a tough situation. So in the United States, Obama recently appeared on Between the Two Ferns, this fake cable access show with Zach Galifianakis. I think a lot of people found it really funny, and then of course a lot of people ended up criticizing him for not being a serious enough president. It's a tough dilemma.
Did you think it was funny?
I did enjoy it. Yeah, I did enjoy it. It was fun.
You know, I remember once upon a time doing an interview with one of the funniest guys I've ever met, Martin Short. And I asked him, do you know why you're funny? And he said, not only do I not know why I'm funny, but I don't want to analyze it lest I, lose whatever that magic is that I have. And I wonder if that's a part of this equation. If you analyze humor too much, do you run the risk of losing whatever inexplicable magic you may possess that makes you funny?
Maybe for the Martin Shorts of the world, the people who have really strong intuitions to begin with. But I think that the average person on the street, the person who might want to be a little bit funnier in their relationship or in a staff meeting, for them to understand this kind of complex or perplexing idea a little better, it probably is a bit worthwhile. So in Hurl, we talk about two strategies to become funnier. One is the Seinfeld strategy, the idea that you point out what's wrong with the world, named aptly after Jerry Seinfeld and his show about nothing. The other is the Silverman strategy, where you take what's wrong with the world and you find a way to make it okay, named after Sarah Silverman. If you can understand if you're more like a Jerry or more like a Sarah, that'll probably help a little bit in your day-to-day life.
Good
Pros
point.
don't seem to need our help, but you and I, we could stand a little bit of practice.
Hey, speak for yourself, buddy. I'm doing just fine here. All right, so we got 30 seconds left. Give me your best one-liner.
So this is an interactive joke. I'm not sure it'll work on camera, but we'll try it, okay?
Sure.
I want you to ask me, what is the secret of good comedy?
Okay, let's do that. Peter, what would you say is the secret to good comedy? Well played, sir. Well played. Okay, good enough.
It's been a very exciting last couple of years because at the two extremes of scale, at the smallest scales we can measure and the largest scales we can measure, we have now, in some sense, hit the Holy Grail. Just a few months ago, the announcement was made of observations that really turn metaphysics into physics, that take us back literally to a millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second after the Big Bang, which is a time frame I never thought we'd be able to observe directly. And if they hold up, and I should say that it's just a single observation right now, and in science we have to be quite skeptical. It has to be confirmed before we can really rely on it, but will allow us to test theories about the beginning of our universe and potentially the existence of other universes, and even the possible existence of grand unified theories that might unify all the forces in nature. At the same time, we have finally, after half a century of searching, discovered the Higgs particle, which may not sound like much, it's just an extra particle, but it's really the capstone of the greatest intellectual enterprise that humans have ever taken, the fundamental standard model that really describes everything in the universe we can see on a fundamental scale, and also points us, we hope, in a new direction towards understanding really why we're here.
Let me read this. This is from a few months ago in the New York Times, a short excerpt for you, and then I'll get you to comment on this. The Times writes, confirming inflation would mean that the universe we see, extending 14 billion light years in space with its hundreds of billions of galaxies, is only an infinitesimal patch in a larger cosmos whose extent, architecture, and fate are unknowable. Moreover, beyond our own universe, there might be an endless number of other universes bubbling into frothy eternity like a pot of pasta, water boiling over. Explain what that's about.
Well, it's a wonderful analogy from Dennis Overby at the Times, and the idea is that inflation is almost too good. Inflation causes the universe to puff up, but it actually doesn't in most theories. In fact, this is what Andre Linde added to Alan Guth's work, is that it tends to not ever stop. The universe, what was the universe, and by universe I meant everything you could once have seen or everything you could ever seen, but that region of space that starts expanding essentially never stops. And continues to expand faster and faster and become larger and larger. And what happens is small pockets fall out of inflation. There's what's called a phase transition, like water melting or water freezing. In certain small regions, certain regions leave inflation, and you get what is essentially a hot Big Bang. And our observable universe was one such region. But what that means is that if this is really due to inflation, it strongly provides evidence for something which again sounded like metaphysics, and I've written about it in The Universe from Nothing and others, that our universe is just one pocket in this metaverse or multiverse, that most of which is continuing to expand faster and faster, and out of which there may be other universes, if you wish, being born at every instant and other universes dying. It means that this process could go on forever, and our universe is just a small random accident in a vast multiverse, and it's fascinating because it means as each universe sort of pops out, falls out of inflation, it can fall out in a different way. It's like falling down a mountain. You can fall in lots of different directions. And each different direction that you leave inflation, in some sense, could give different laws of physics in that region of space, or at least certain different laws of physics. And if that's the case, it may be that many of the fundamental laws that we see and think are truly fundamental are just accidents of our experience. It could be in each universe there are different laws of physics, and that may help explain other paradoxes about the universe we see. So if we can really demonstrate that inflation happened, it gives us incredibly strong indirect evidence of the existence of other universes, which we'll never see directly, but it takes it out of the realm of metaphysics. It's like the fact, at the turn of the last century, in the 1900s, no one could see atoms directly, but all of the indirect evidence told us atoms exist. Now we may be in a situation where we'll never see those other universes directly, but we can have great confidence if we can test these ideas more and more that they exist. And that changes our picture once more in the sense that I referred to earlier, not only in the very small, but in the very large. It says the universe on very, very large scales is very different because it's not a universe, it's a multiverse full of regions that are just being born today, other regions that are dying. And that's very different than the picture we had 30 years ago.
I want to just actually quote a quote that you have right near the beginning of the book. It's G.K. Chesterton from more than a century ago who says, "One may understand the cosmos, but never the ego. The self is more distant than any star." And I wonder whether a century later, that's still apt.
I think it is. You know, the irony, of course, the reason I love that Chesterton quote and why I chose it for the book's epigram is because I normally write about things like physics and cosmology and some of these more esoteric things. And they were simple compared to trying to pin down, the aspects of the self. So to me, that was, the perfect way to capture that. And there's been an explosion of research, and we know so much more than we knew back 100 years ago when Chesterton was writing. But of course, the way science works is you answer one question and you open up 10 more. I mean, that's part of the joy of scientific discovery in the first place. And it just seems that the more we learn about the science of self, the more we realize how far we have to go before we can really understand it. Stories are kind of a hot topic now, in neuroscience, in psychology, in cognitive psychology, because increasingly I think we're beginning to understand just how much we rely on stories to make sense of the world and also of ourselves. It's this whole notion of a personal narrative. One of the most fascinating men that I spoke to for this book, he's at Northwestern, and he's been essentially having people tell him their life stories for the last 15, 20 years to try and pinpoint what the different kinds of narratives. And we really do, on some level, we have all these memories and all these experiences, and they're all kind of a jumble, and a lot of what we do is create a narrative out of that. And it may or may not be true. Obviously, it's going to be based in fact, but the memory is faulty. And over time, we start to take some, shall we say, poetic license with the facts. And that ends up becoming how we shape our sense of who we are, how we present ourselves to the world, that whole notion of a constructed identity. So for me, the narrative self, which is built out of our autobiographical memories and experiences, is ultimately what matters for us as human beings. All the other aspects that I talk about are important. We absolutely want to understand more about the brain, the human genome. We want to understand, personality studies, all of these things. We want to understand how we relate to our virtual digital selves, how much of those are us and how much are, again, something divorced from us. But ultimately, it's the stories we tell that give our life meaning.
Let's put up a couple of maps just to remind everybody the part of the world that we're talking about. Everybody knows Iraq now. You've seen this on your TVs a lot lately. Here is the country of Iraq in desperate trouble, as you've no doubt heard on the news over the past several days. And then let's flip this over and show the areas where the conflict is particularly intense as we zoom in on that. And then we'll get into some discussion about why and where all this is taking place. Those explosion signs, as you can see, are moving ever closer to Baghdad. Eric, just I guess a housekeeping point before we start here. I have heard ISIS referred to as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. I've also heard it referred to as the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. Which is right?
Well, they're both right. We have a lot of trouble translating names from Arabic and Persian, but I personally, in my columns, use the ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Shams, which is the Arab name for the territory of Greater Syria.
Okay. And Janice, to you on the next point, how are they different from al-Qaeda?
They're a branch of al-Qaeda which split after al-Qaeda denounced ISIS for what al-Qaeda says its militancy and its violence against civilians. They were fighting essentially together in Syria against the al-Assad regime, and so that split occurred in the midst of the fight in Syria.
Thabit, let me follow up on that. To what extent do you think Syria's civil war has contributed to the growth of ISIS?
Well, fundamentally, there was always a risk, of course, of more and more extremism as the power vacuum was not really getting filled, especially in the areas north of Baghdad. But with the civil war in Syria, there was now a large power vacuum in the northeastern part especially, and northern part of Syria, from Aleppo all the way to the border with Iraq. And this allowed, of course, all kinds of disaffected elements to organize, regroup, and then cross the border.
Janice, one of the things I think people are trying to figure out is they just had an election there in which Maliki won re-election. That was just 3 weeks ago. Things were supposed to be sort of settling down. What has, in fact, ratcheted things up?
Well, Steve Maliki did win re-election, but he won re-election with the support of the large Shia in Baghdad, community in Baghdad and the south. In fact, he's been increasingly alienated from the Sunni area. This is a leader with no vision. He practiced exclusivist politics, frankly went after the Sunni, left them no room in a coalition government, exiled one of their leaders to Kurdistan. So this is an all or nothing politician. And even now, when his regime seems to be threatened, he's summoning Shia from all over the country to fight, but making no overtures to Sunni leaders. You know, what's interesting in this story to me is not ISIS, because they've been able to move back and forth across the border from Syria, but the former Ba'athist tribes and Saddam supporters who have joined the fight, and they're doing this largely to get rid of the Maliki government from the Sunni areas. So it is local.
But this is why this group is more than just a flash in the pan. You know, to a certain extent, you know, I understand what's being said, but there is an existentialist threat here because, despite the fact that these extremist elements are abhorred even in Sunni territories, but they have the ability to intensify and deepen sectarianism. This, coupled with Maliki's dogged refusal to truly establish a government of national reconciliation, a national unity government, in which basically he would have to accept some sort of compromise with the various elements that are vying for power, and perhaps even accept the presence of some rather, you know, unpalatable individuals. But he has refused this, and coupled then with the violence of this extremist group, the sectarian divide could deepen, and I fear very much for the country. I mean, I've appeared on this program many times in the past, and I've always had an optimistic, you know, view in the long run.
Not now?
But well, now it's really, you know, on a knife's edge. I mean, no country, no matter how incredibly united it is, this applies even to Canada and any other country. No country has a divine right to be unified forever. Countries are man-made, and groups like this could eventually lead to some kind of a division.
You wanted to comment on whether the American withdrawal is the explanation for much of what's going on today.
You know, there's no question that the American invasion and removal of Saddam broke this open. But what did we have before? Yes, we had the most advanced Arab country in terms of science and women, but we also had the most brutal Arab country. Even Assad was not as brutal as Saddam Hussein. And why was he so brutal? Because there was a Sunni minority ruling a Shia majority. That's what creates the brutality, that's what creates the paranoia. For anybody to say that this is the result of the withdrawal of American troops is frankly to me virtually a ludicrous argument, because what that implies is that the United States had to keep troops on the ground for 10, 20, 30 years. That's not possible, that's not reasonable, and in fact it would have exacerbated the problem. What we're seeing now is the failure of leadership by Maliki and the people around him to seize the historical opportunity they were given.
To an extent, I agree with everything that's been said. I would say, if we want to sum it up, really sum up, you can even personalize it. There are three individuals even that are responsible for this. Saddam Hussein, for decades of one of the most fascistic, brutal regimes that smashed civil society and created an atmosphere of fear and violence in the country. George Bush, for the destruction, the physical destruction of this country. Yes. And then the removal of elements of the state, the police, the army, the bureaucracy, without willing to invest what was needed to reconstruct it. And third is al-Maliki, who, despite all the difficulties, still had an incredible opportunity to create a government of national unity, an atmosphere of reconciliation that could go beyond the destruction, beyond the terror, beyond the fascism that the country has experienced. You get extremists precisely because there is a mentality of hopelessness. By the way, just as a further information on this, I'm in contact with people in Iraq now. Believe it or not, the people, at least the individuals that I know about in Mosul today, who are very modern, they are quite progressive, they're in no way ideologically committed to the program of ISIS, are delighted that what they say is the sectarian Iraqi army leaving the city and leaving us alone. That we'll put on a veil and grow our beards and be able to deal with these extremists. But the sectarian army for them was far more dangerous.
I want to start, before we talk about today, just putting our discussion in a bit of context, because I want to go back about a decade to the time when your government and the Assembly of First Nations successfully negotiated the Kelowna Accord, which would have flowed, I think, $5 billion to Aboriginal communities and was considered at the time quite a significant achievement. What enabled you to get that agreement in place?
Well, I think that probably the most important thing was trust. I had great confidence and trusted Phil Fontaine and the other Aboriginal leaders who were there, and I believe that he trusted me, as well as Andy Scott, who was our minister, and in fact trusted us in what we wanted to do. I think the next thing that happened is that we didn't go in there and impose anything on them. We didn't tell them these are the issues you're going to deal with. We went out, sat down with all of the Aboriginal leadership, along with the provincial premiers and the territorial leaders, members of my cabinet, and said, what do you think the issues are? And the issues they named were the issues that we thought were the important ones. We then said, what do you think the solutions are? Well, let's talk from that basis. There'll be a negotiation. But I think the other thing was we gave it plenty of time. The fact of the matter is, we started this virtually the day that I became Prime Minister, and it took 15 to 18 months of negotiation. But what that meant was that when we would put a proposal down and when we were getting close, this gave them the chance to go back and talk to their communities and basically bring them within so that there were no surprises. There was no attempt to put something over on anybody, to impose somebody on a very short time scale, which we knew, in fact, if we had done, they would never have been able to do. And that's one of the big mistakes this government has made. They didn't ask what the issues were. They didn't try to arrive at a solution, and they refused to give the AF any time to go back and consult with their membership, which in fact was absolutely crucial.
Well, you've anticipated where I wanted to go next, which was, in fact, fast forward a decade to the current process that broke down and, in fact, cost the Assembly of First Nations Grand Chief Sean Atleo his job, since he resigned when the thing fell apart. Beyond what you've just said, why do you think it fell apart so badly this time?
Well, it goes back to the issue of trust. The fact is that when the current government axed Kelowna, what they did is they walked away from the necessity in terms of education of providing fair funding. In other words, right now, if you go to a reserve school, you receive anywhere from 20 to, in some cases, 50% per capita less funding than the provinces are providing for a school that might be, 2 kilometers away. Everybody understood that gap existed. And then the first time that the AFN got ready to meet with the Prime Minister, the day before, the Minister of Indian Affairs at the time made a public announcement that there was no such gap, which meant that the whole purpose of the meeting had been thrown into the wastebasket, and everybody knew there was a gap. And of course, the proof of that was 6 months later, the government admitted that there was a huge funding gap. That's when they put the $1.9 billion on the table. But having admitted there was a gap, having canned Kelowna, the government then said, but we're not going to give you any money for another 2 to 3 years. That meant that a young person who, at the day of Kelowna, went into grade 1, would have spent their entire primary school years, 8 years, without having any kind of a semblance of fair funding with other Canadians. That means that their ability to learn to read and write was held back. They were forced into a position of catch-up. And the Aboriginal leadership knew that. If I could just say one other thing, and this is really very important. The government accuses the First Nations of trying to block progress. That's not what they're trying to do. What the First Nations are saying is, we love our children. And we want to provide our children with the same education that you provide your children. We want to provide our children with the same opportunities. And for the Canadian government to do what they have now done, but to come along and say, it is my way or the highway, it's our plan or no plan, and we're not going to listen to you, I don't think there's a parent in this country would stand for that.
Was there one incident in particular, I don't know, a game that you attended or an article in the newspaper you read or something that made you realize that's offensive and I want to change that?
Yes. Because I grew up on the Navajo Nation, I didn't see how the sports mascot issue affected the Native American community. And so when I actually left, I went off to college. At the time, I was living in Lawrence, Kansas, and I attended, I knew about the issue, but I wanted to see it firsthand. So we attended the Kansas City Chiefs and the Washington team played in Kansas City. And I was very appalled to see the outward racism towards Native American people. And it was okay. It was socially acceptable. And as we watch people wearing traditional, mocking our traditional regalia and saying very racist and hurtful things to the Native American people that we were with, who were silently protesting this event, were saying very harsh things to us. And I was very appalled by that because it was okay. No one objected.
Harsh things such as what?
We won, you lost, get over it, go back to your reservation. Why don't you just go get drunk? Things like that. It was definitely, we definitely felt like we were being targeted based on our race.
Now, do you think that was just a small handful of idiots, or do you think they speak for a broader population?
I think that because it was, the way I seen it, it was socially acceptable to do that. Nobody objected. Nobody jumped in to say anything otherwise. It was just like, oh, okay, it was just another day, and that was okay. And I think that definitely that, other people feel that way. They just don't say it. And I think that what people don't realize is that they don't see what happens at these games. the type of misappropriation of our culture that occurs at these games. People do all sorts of things that they think that Native American people do, and it's very offensive. And that's the part that we don't see. Unless you expose yourself to it, you're not going to know.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety if you want. They're all on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, or on our iTunes channel, or on the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.